Hello, welcome back to the studio. As you can see, I've been hard at work on a lovely bluebells in the wood painting, and I've broken it down into 5 stages for you. The first stage is selecting the right photographs, and of course some planning. Step 3 is to apply an acrylic underpainting and then moving into oils, and of course the last stage is the refinements, and there'll be some little pickles, tips and tricks along the way as well. That's a lot to do. I think we better spin the camera, get those brushes out. Pick a reference photograph, and I've got dozens of bluebell photographs to choose from. This has got more bluebells in it, but I think this one actually looks somewhat nicer. The problem is it's really a reference photograph of 2 halves. See, it's almost 50-50. Not a great deal of interest in the foreground, and yes, it's got a tree in it, but there's really nothing else to frame the picture. Quite honestly, it's a little flat. It doesn't have much structure to it. This really sort of encapsulates what I'm looking for in a reference photograph. This one that Terry took. It has the classic, about 1/3 for the bottom half, and roughly 2/3 for the top half. These beautiful trees, see how they frame the scene. And yes, there are some bluebells in the background, but it doesn't mean to say I can't grow some further forwards in my painting. This is what I'm going to choose. And the next stage is going to be, well, have you guessed? Let's look at planning. Step 2. Now, just because the reference photograph is what they call portrait style, in other words, upright, doesn't mean you've always got to do it upright. You might decide to change and plan to do your painting differently. Now, I like to do a little quick sketch sometimes, just so I've got an idea of what I'm doing here. And literally all I'm doing is thinking about where that horizon line is going to be. This little detail here is going to be, and it comes right round into the corner of my painting, and it goes from right off in the distance here, and you see how far across it comes? Well beyond halfway. By doing these little drawings, it kind of simplifies the whole process of doing your own painting, just to turn it into sort of almost like a cartoon. Planning out roughly where things are going to live in your painting. It helps you sort of establish where you think things are needed and where maybe they're not needed. Just because it's an upright doesn't mean you have to have it as an upright. Let's change things a little bit. See, so I'm making my plans before I get to my canvas. So this is a much more open look. This is a tighter look because I'm working on a sort of foreshortened area. I still want to get my nice proportions in here, but maybe my horizon line's gone up a little bit to take into account the change of ratio between height and width. Every time you do a little sketch like this, it gives you new ideas about composition and how you would plan your painting. But I think Terry's photograph is really much spot on, and that's probably what I'm going to stick to. This little design, but you can see I can switch things around if I want them to. Having reduced our photograph to just a very, very simple cartoon type sketch, we can transfer this onto our canvas. I transferred over the basic layout of my painting, and I sort of adjusted things as I was going along, because sometimes you have sort of a change of heart and you start looking at your reference picture and your cartoon drawing that you did, the little simplified version, and you have to make little adjustments. One of the things you saw me using there was something called a marl stick. Now this is just kind of any sort of a stick really with a hook on it. In this case I've got a hook that goes over the top of my canvas, so I can actually hook it over the top of the canvas. And you saw me using it there for just sort of positioning things like the trees where they're going to be. I also used it for working out levels. Now, on to stage 3. I think we need for that some acrylics. So with a basic drawing, now we can dive into the underpainting stage, which is acrylic stage 3. And I just want to address a question or two that comes up quite frequently, which is about what colours to choose and if you could use something other than acrylics for this. And of course the answer is yes, you could use oils for the entire painting. I use acrylics because they dry quickly, and on my tight filming schedule it means I don't have to sit and wait for things to dry for a week or two. it doesn't really matter what brand you use. Buy just some basic student quality paints and they will work absolutely fine. Now, let's have a look and see what colours I am using. If we have a look at our colour photograph here, you see that my background sky is sort of a very pale blue-grey colour. That's handy. I already have a grey canvas, but I just need a tint of blue on it. And for this colour, I'm going to be using something like this, cobalt blue. It's a sort of nice soft blue colour, quite nice and cool. If I add a touch of white to it, that'll work out really nicely, I think. And the other colours I'm going to be using, well, I want a nice green and some nice yellow tones in here and a nice brown tone. And really, I can mix these all up using something like burnt umber, a nice hooker's green, maybe even a primary yellow. So again, just basic colours, nothing special. I didn't have to go out and buy a special colour for any of this. And remember, these are underpaintings, so they don't even have to be the finished colours. They just have to work well for the oil stage, which is coming next. And that's where we can be more sort of like careful about how we refine our colours. To get me started, I want to use some of this cobalt blue and a touch of white for my background sky. I'll bring the reference picture up over in the corner. And I'm going to use a really rough old brush for this. I just want to scrub on some colour. I probably add a little drop of water to my plate as well, because as you know, this is my favourite plastic plate for mixing paint upon, and it means I can just let these dry out sometimes and just remix them. Quite quickly, you see, I think I've got a colour I could use. Here's a top little tip though. You can always put some of this on the top of your reference photograph. As you see, that blue colour is just maybe a little bit too strong. It wants to be slightly more to the grey side, but well, we'll see how it goes. Remember, this reference photograph is never going to hang on the wall next to your painting. So if these colours are a little bit off, it's absolutely fine. Don't get all bent out of shape. So I sort of mapped out roughly where I think the blue colour is going to be. And I just say, I'm going to put this on really nice and thin, more of a suggestion rather than being like a nice big sort of cloudy sky. To say in my paintings, you know, perfection is close to madness sometimes. You try and get something absolutely perfect and it never quite looks right, and you just end up being kind of frustrated with your work because you can't get it looking exactly like you think it should do. And I say you probably learn more from being a little imperfect and enjoying the process rather than trying to make something perfect. And if you come up short, I just feel such a defeat. Okay, so I can't kind of put it any plainer than that. Don't beat yourselves up. Remember, this is supposed to be fun. And if it's not fun, you're doing something wrong. Okay. Do I need to add more? What do you reckon? Look at the reference picture. I've let it kind of come down quite a little bit. I think there's a little bit of blue, something in the background over there behind that tree, maybe. I know there's some bluebells in there. Let's drop some of those on just for the heck. I think just for some fun. Oops, I'm off the screen now. I went too low. Okay, I think it's about as much as I need to do. Now this is drying really quickly. It's quite a nice warm day here today. And if I keep falling with this, I'm going to just drag this all off. So once you think you've got it on there, remember, but some put all the leaves and foliage over the top, you're not going to see probably 90% of this. You might just see a few little holes here and there. Leave this to dry for just a few moments and we'll have a look at my plate and see what other colours I've got. Okay. Let's have a look at our reference photograph up here in the corner. I'm working on this background tree. Remember, we're working from the distance to the foreground, so you always want to be working on things the furthest back. That's the reason why I started with the sky. Now, I want some of these nice trees in the background. They're quite nice and limey, and I want to really mix up a nice bright sort of pale yellow colour. Here's my plate. I put out some of that nice hooker's green, some primary yellow, and I've got a little touch of white there. I might need a little bit more, actually. I should have put some more out. And to paint this, I'm going to use one of my favourites. No, not the chocolate sponge, but an old car sponge. I use this a lot because it gets me really great texture and it's very easy to use. You can sort of just dab the paint on and you don't have to be sort of too careful about it. Now, take a little touch of that white, got a little bit of blue mixed in with it. think we've almost got the right colour. Let's have a go. Let's say there's some nice trees up here in the background. Just dab those on and do a little comparison with what we've got. Now, my sky's a little stronger blue colour than the reference photograph, and I don't care. It still looks like it's going to work out quite well. And this lime green colour here is quite nice too. Now, there's another branch coming in here. So I probably need a little bit more green to cover that a little bit up, because there's a little bit more shadow coming through there. But the outer edges look lovely and bright and limey, don't they? And remember, you can just add this, and if it's not quite perfectly right, let it dry for a few minutes, and then you can come back and add another layer. It's the beauty of acrylics. They dry quickly, and you can work over and over and over them. Now, I'll do a little bit of this on the other side as well, and I'll just do a little bit of time lapse through this to save you sit and watch me doing the whole process. This actually took me probably about, well, maybe 25 minutes, half an hour. And I haven't completed yet. I need to come back in and fill in some more of this detail in here. But I'm going to overpaint this in oils. So I'm not painting the darkest dark trees. I'm just painting the lightest backdrop trees to make those trees come forward, which is the reason why I'm doing this in acrylic. And I'm going to be doing the oils over the top because they're a little bit bolder and a bit stronger. They really stand out from this background. So let's carry on. Adding a little bit more dark colour into the base here, and I might just add some green tones in here as well. Now the final part of blocking in is to drop in the path here. As you can see, I've just really using sort of wet sloppy mixtures, dropped into some colour, just looking for this underpainting, and I got, what's the colour I got? Burnt umber. So it's a sort of nice sort of mid-brown, a warmish brown colour. It's the wrong colour entirely, I know. I'll put a little bit of white with it, maybe even a touch of yellow. I'm not too fussed really. I just want to mark the position of the path. I'm going to overpaint this in oils. So if this isn't quite right, it doesn't really matter too much. As I say, it's just really holding the position. And again, think about how a path is shaped, how maybe there's some wear and tear. So intentionally put your paint on here with a little bit of a dip in the centre. And then you can see, when you look at the reference picture, the reference photograph up the side here, maybe you can start to see how loosely you can paint things. You do not have to paint in great detail when you're doing an underpainting. You just have to have things in the right places. And it's amazing how much detail our eye fills in when we're not really trying. Okay, let's bring this to a finish now. Carry on adding some more paint here. And then I think it's time for a cup of tea and let this sit and dry completely. So here's my painting after stage 3. It's taken me about an hour to get this far. I think that's pretty good progress. And now I feel confident I can continue my painting using oils. Now, I know you're probably thinking, why don't you just carry on using acrylics? And I certainly could. But I find that if I switch to oils now, I can refine my colours more carefully. If I do something wrong, I can just wipe it off and my underpainting is still safe and secure. I also find that using oils gives my paintings a certain richness that I struggle to achieve with acrylic. Just my take on things, but I think it's time we actually go to stage 4 and start putting this together with some oil colours. Before I put oil paint on my canvas, I need to give it a protective coat of something like this, Bob Ross Liquid Clear, or even some refined linseed oil. The idea being that if you paint on top of this first, then you can wipe off any mistakes. It's a bit like in a magic razor. It'll be under the paint. It means that the paint won't stick to the canvas and it won't cause a stain. So this is a great way of protecting your canvas. It means you can have as many goes at repainting it as you like. What shall I use today? I've used this quite a bit. Maybe I'll use refined linseed oil this time. I've put a small amount of linseed oil in a dish. I'm going to use this very old Bob Ross landscape brush to scrub on a thin coat. Now, this is a little runnier and thinner than the Bob Ross Liquid Clear, so you need to apply it very thinly. Get a good grip on your canvas and really scrub this in. The surface wants to be just slightly oily, so you might have to get down a bit below the canvas and try and catch some light in it. I've dimmed the lights in the studio, got my mobile phone and turned on the torch, and I hope you can see that. If I run my light underneath, can you see that lovely sort of glistening effect I'm getting there? That's the effect of the linseed oil that I just applied. You can see that's got oil on it, and as I go down, it sort of turns a sort of more matte look. That means there's no oil there. The idea is just to apply a very, very thin coating. If I run my finger over this, it should feel just slightly wet. But don't have it so that you can make a line and it looks like it's going to run. That's way too much. And you can just gently blot the surface off. But the idea is to remove any of the surplus, but don't scrub it dry. Just knock off the excess. As you can see, some of my paints are a little bit on the runny side. I put a little bit of tissue under them to soak up the oil. And I've arranged them in sort of groups. I try to be a little bit clever here. Titanium white, obviously, for lightning colours. Alizarin crimson, phthalo blue. I'm hoping that's going to make me some nice bluebell colours. It's a tricky colour. And these three colours, the ochre, dark sienna, Van Dyke brown, I put tree trunks and pathway because they're all kind of similar. And over on the side here, sap green, cad yellow and Indian yellow. These are for my foliage. And I might have to add some black. I'm not sure yet, but I think this will give me the right sort of combination of colours. Now let's mop this up before it gets me into a right pickle. I'll bring the reference photograph up here on the side. Now, this little painting is different to the way Bob would normally paint and to the way I've done it previously. More often than not, Bob would underpaint the trees, do all the foliage. He'd underpaint them in a dark, sticky colour first, and then he would highlight on top with thin, oily paints. It's called sort of the wet on wet technique, or the fat over lean, in other words, sort of oily, wet, fat paint over thin, dry, lean paint. It's a technique that has been used, well, for time immemorial. But this little painting's different. If you have a look at the reference photograph, you'll notice that all the dark green colours are going on over the top, over a light colour. So it's sort of back to front. Now, if I'd have painted this section here, all these light colours in oils, and done it in thin, sort of transparent, sort of oily colours, which is what the highlights tend to be, then I would have had to leave this to dry completely before I tried to make a thick, dark, sticky colour stick to the top of it. It would be a problem because thick, dark, sticky colours tend not to want to stick to light, thin, oily colours. They just tend to pull the colour off. It's another reason why sometimes using acrylics, which dry nice and quickly, is the way to go. So, actual fact, I just need to paint trees over the top of this in a nice dark green colour. There's no real particular highlights, and any highlights that there might be are going to come from the background trees for a change. Let's mix up some colour and you'll see what I mean. For my dark green colours, I'm going to be using some sap green and mainly black. So let's take all of this sap green and a good chunk of black. I want to mix up one good dark strong green colour, which is pretty much sort of present throughout the entire painting. So as I was saying, I always want one really good dark strong green colour, because if I try and mix up several versions of this, then I'm going to be kind of forever mixing up colours. They may not all go together. This is what's known as mixing up a local colour. In other words, one green colour which you can vary in tones. And I'll be doing some more of that later on in my painting. Now this is a nice strong dark green colour here, maybe a little too green. So I'm going to put a tiny touch of cadmium yellow into it. So you want to add it small amounts at a time. So I want to lighten my colour, I want to brighten my colour, but I don't want to whiten my colour. There we go. As you can see, I've just managed to kind of get that a little bit brighter, a little bit more lime green coloured. And this, I think, we're going to make a really nice painting colour for my trees. Now, let's get a brush. I got myself a nice, fresh, clean, dry Bob Ross 1-inch landscape brush. Fairly new. I want a sort of one that's not too badly worn. And I'm going to use this to go back into my dark green colour. going to just pull the paint down, and I'm going to load just one side of it, just that back side. I can remember which way I'm loading it because I usually see that Bob Ross logo facing outwards or up to the top. Notice how I'm just going to pull my paint down, give it a little push. What I'm looking to do is to really spread the brush. I don't want this brush clumping together. Get my hand out of the way. I really want to press that brush and really open it up. And notice I'm favouring one corner more than the other. So I'm going to press this corner forwards and splay the bristles apart. The idea is we want to create some nice foliage. Now there's a branch through here, you can still see it penciled on. And I'm trying to paint some foliage behind the tree first. So I'm doing this in layers. There's quite a lot of lovely dark foliage in here. So I'm going to just tip my brush to one side and have a few sort of little taps with it. As you see, it creates these nice little patterns. Notice that each of these branches looks like, I always describe them as sort of like a sort of an umbrella shape. And the idea is you want to try and reproduce that sort of shape, those little clumps of foliage. Now, right now, these are just individual little touches of paint, but if you link them up like that, into like a little grouping, it looks like a little branch of a tree. Now, you look at the reference photograph up there, you can see that what I'm doing is I'm trying to sort of judge roughly where the path is. There's a nice little piece of foliage hanging down. There's some nice lime green colour there. So the idea is not to completely obliterate all of the background. Let some of that come through and put these dark colours up on top. Your challenge is not overpainting it, of course. You see, and I'll do a little bit, and I'll stand back, and I'll do a little bit more. I think my colour's a little on the dark side. I might adjust my colours now. Add a little bit more cadmium yellow to my colour to lighten it, but not to whiten it. Now, what I did then is I just knocked off some of the paint from my brush. Now, you might find occasionally using this technique that you're going to clog a brush up. And the way to do it is just to simply tap vigorously on the palette. And this just opens up the brush. It knocks out all the surplus paint because I want some sort of thin spidery foliage back in here. I don't really want that really heavy foliage that I've been doing here on the edge. And as you notice, the brush still wants to give up its paint, but I can be a little bit more sort of fine and feathery with it. As I go over to the other side of that tree trunk, I'll drop in some foliage coming the other way. So create these little sort of umbrella shapes again. Now, I'm going to carry on adding colour to my painting. I've got tree trunks in the background coming here. So I'm going to go backwards and forwards between light greens and dark greens, building up the foliage as I go. I do want to cover up that corner. It's a bit of a raw corner there, isn't it? And I put something nice and green over that. You see, it just rounds out that corner nicely. I'll do a little bit more time lapse through this, and I'll just carry on adding some foliage to this side of my painting. I'm going to do something which I tell you to do all the time. Stand back from your painting. So I'm about 10 feet from my painting. I'm well behind the camera, and I went to have a look at the right hand side of my painting, compare it to the right hand side of the reference. And what do you think about the depth of colour, the darkness of the green colour? Is it right, or is it too pale and a bit too mushy looking? Because I can see by standing back that this entire right hand side here has gotten kind of like a pea green look to it, and I look at the reference photograph and you can see it's got a much deeper green colour. My original green colour here was probably closer to what I need, or somewhere between the two, but I didn't stand back. Now, it's a simple kind of thing to do, and I made that little mistake. I could have got myself into a pickle. Had I carried on with it, I got myself into a real trouble. So stand back all the time from your painting. So I just need to go back in here and darken this up a little bit. I need to correct this colour. It's a little bit too sort of mushy looking. I need a little bit more of that black colour back in there again. If I'd have fixed this earlier on, well, this might not have happened, but then you wouldn't have got to see it. So let's fix these colours a little bit better. So now when I stand back, you can see just adding that little extra darkness back into my painting, I gained so much. But I didn't replace all of those colours. I literally just put in just a few punches of that nice dark colour again. So now I've got 3 layers of colour. I got the original acrylic on there, that pea green colour I just put on, and a little bit of that darker green colour on top. So I've got 3 layers of depth in here, and the paint looks so much better for it. But before I do any more on this side, I need to really add a few tree trunks into here. I think I might do a little bit of work on this side, just so I've got a sense of balance. Maybe I'll just add just a few branches in here, and then we'll put in a tree trunk or 2. On that last little sequence, you saw I play around with my colours a little bit, and I introduced a little touch of Indian yellow just for a little variety, so you don't end up sort of overdoing it with one particular tone of green colour, although there's sort of 3 or 4 tones in here. A little Indian yellow just lines this side a fraction. It doesn't look quite so deep and dark, and it's just fun to play around with colours. But I do need to put some structure in here. I need some sticks and twigs, and I need lots of little branches in the background, and for that I need a liner brush. Now, this is a natural liner brush, the Bob Ross natural bristle liner brush, and this is a synthetic one. And I hear people complaining about these brushes, liner brushes in general, sort of saying they're very hard to make nice fine tips with. And if you look carefully, you can see that these are wet. I put these into some linseed oil. I've dropped them into a few drops of linseed oil probably about 10-15 minutes ago. Now, I know this is synthetic, it won't absorb any oil, but somehow they just soften up a little bit if they've been washed in thinners, and they go a little bit hard and crusty. And these definitely soften up a little bit. You'll find if you put a few drops of linseed oil through the brush before you intend to use it, they work much better. So let's add a few little sticks and twigs through here. And I'm going to use a little touch of black. I might just tint it with a little bit of Van Dyke brown. As you see, you want your paint nice and oily, so you can roll your brush through it, draw it to a nice little point. And in the background in here, there's a whole bunch of little sticks and twigs and things, and hold your brush well back as always, and you just want to drop these in nice and loose. And you see, by having a little bit of light through the back there, I can just drop these in. And always paint on the very point of your brush. Just use the very, very tip of the brush. I just look down at my reference picture. There's a few nice little trees back in here as well. And I'll just add a bunch of these up into here. The main tree is going to come right through here. You can see I left a little gap for it, but you need this sort of structure to hold your painting together. There you go, and that's going to be the middle of my tree trunk there. I'm not going to try and do it all with a liner brush, but just to remind you where that main tree trunk is, and that's going to go right the way through to about there. Hope you can too. So that goes right through to about there. So I know exactly where my main trees are going to be. Maybe I should work on those next. Of course, I have to think about bluebells. So my painting's progressing nicely. And I do think I'd like to get some bluebells in there next, even in the background before I put the tree trunks on. I think that would be a sensible order. Now, I've painted bluebell paintings before, and I've really struggled to get some good colours for bluebells. The problem I used to have was that I would mix up a colour for this little patch of bluebells, and I would put that on there and it would look great, but then I'd mix up another sort of value for another patch of bluebells, and so on and so on and so on. And by the time I'd completed the entire painting, I sort of had sort of a patchwork quilt of all sorts of blues, but very little continuity. So the trick I'm going to give you is to mix up what's called a local colour. In other words, one value of bluebells for the mid colour, and then add either Payne's Grey or a little touch of black for the darker shadowy ones, or a little hint of white for the brighter ones in sunlight. But the local colour, that's your continuity, that's your thread of continuity through the entire painting. I think it will give you the best results. So let's mix up some nice colour. As my reference photograph doesn't have very many bluebells, I'm going to use another reference photograph and I'll bring it up on the side there for you. It's sort of what I call the common colour, the one that's sort of the colour that's going to be running as a main theme through this painting. And it's definitely to the lavender side. Now, I know that I can make lavender using crimson and a touch of phthalo blue. So that's a good starting point. So there's a lovely mid-lavender colour. And you can see that's actually got a really nice bluish tint to it already. I could add a tiny little drop more of the phthalo blue though. Just a hint more. Now, I could add a tiny drop of titanium white to it to make a lighter value, or I could add a little tiny drop of black to make a darker shadowy value. But this will be the constant colour I use for all of my bluebells. For the brightest bluebells, I'm going to take a touch of my local colour and add a very small amount of white to it. And you see I continue mixing my colours until I got what I think will make a nice distant bluebell colour. There isn't very many bluebells on my reference painting photograph, but there are enough. Now, to add them to my painting, I'm going to be using a fan brush. So it's a technique I've used before, where I just tap my brush into the paint and I splay the bristles apart. Most importantly, you open the brush up and you get a nice amount of paint, but just kind of keep it onto the very, very tips of the brush. Let's just add a few in to see what they look like. Bright enough? What do you think? Go a little brighter? Add a little touch more white to my colour. And give that a little go. Ah, now we're getting there. See, they're just into the edge of the sunlight there. And by doing this very, very gently with a nicely splayed apart brush, we create the illusion of this lovely soft effect of bluebells. So I'm probably going to just tone my colours down just a little tiny bit. Just as we go off the edge there. I'm probably going to go back into some of the slightly darker lavender colours here. See, that got a lovely sort of an eye line there, takes your eye off into the distance. I'll add a few more in here, and maybe a little touch of green as well, because I want to actually put some sort of nice stems and stalks in around them. So let's carry on doing a little bit more of this in some time lapse. So you saw in that last little sequence, I went from using my brush upright and just touching the canvas very gently to put in these pale background little bluebells. It's more like a cloud of colour. And as I worked further forwards and under this tree, I wanted to introduce the idea that this was all in shade. So I changed my colour back to the local colour, that darker purple tone. I didn't even need to add black into it in the end because it was dark enough. You'll also notice I went from using my brush upright to using it a little bit more on a corner with a few more little upward pushes like that. I've gone from, as I say, a cloud of colour to little speckles of detail here in the foreground in no more than the distance of, well, 2 or 3 inches. You see, by changing the detail from a cloud of colour to little speckles of detail, suddenly you're bringing the person's eye into the foreground. Take care when you do this. Make sure you don't clog your brush up so that when you're just tapping onto the canvas, and I mean just tapping, you're not creating clumps of colour, but indeed little tiny speckles. Okay, let's press on. I want to drop in a tree trunk next, and I'll get to this other side maybe a little bit later on. For my tree trunks, typically Bob would underpaint them with something really strong and dark, like a nice black and brown colour. But these trees are sort of a beigey sort of colour. Got a nice little bit of patterning on it. I'll bring up a close-up over there on the side. So I'm going to be using maybe a little less dark colour here. I put out some Van Dyke Brown, dark sienna and some yellow ochre, and I'm going to be using a little flat brush, but you could easily use a filbert brush. You can see how that's dried. So I'm going to put out just a little touch of dark sienna, a little touch of ochre, maybe even a little hint of white. I just want to get a sort of basic tree shape in. I may not even need the Van Dyke Brown. And as I say, I'm going to just use this flat brush. Now, I sneakily put on this dark colour here. Okay, I put it on there because I wanted it to be the shadow side of my tree. And if I just run my brush down beside it, you can see I'm going to be putting sort of the light colour to the right, and my little marker was actually the shadow side on the left. There we go, so drop that in. And there, down into here. Now it doesn't go any further than that, just at the edge of those bluebells, and I can bring in some more bluebells to kind of cover up his little feet, as Bob would say. And down in here, well, you're not going to see the bottom of this tree, it's down here in the shadows. Okay, so just dropping in that simple tree trunk is really kind of finishing this side of my painting up really rather nice. As I say, I should do some little touches of highlight in a moment. Before I go much further with my painting, I do a little stand back again. I'm about 8-10 feet behind the camera here, so I'm quite a good distance away from the painting. I'm holding my reference photograph and I'm just sort of weighing things up. I think my tree is probably a little on the skinny side. So I'm just going to beef it up a little bit. And if you go and spend any amount of time looking at some of the work of the old masters, people like Singer Sargent and the like, when you see their work at a distance, it's breathtaking. But when you see it up close, not that inspiration, I'm afraid. You kind of look at it and think, so, God, that doesn't look anything like I imagined it would be. From close up, it looks a bit of a pickle. So sometimes when you're standing really close to it, it just doesn't look right. But when you stand way back, it looks a lot better. Somebody said I should see this from next door. I think they were joking. I hope they were. Let me add a few little pops of light on the side of my tree. Those little pops of light, I just wiped off my flat brush, take a little white, a touch of ochre. Quite grey actually. I got a bunch of little different colours there on my brush. Ochres, whites, a little bit of lavender colour. You're just looking for something bright and light, but not white. If I were doing this and I had unlimited time, I would have probably let this tree dry completely before I did this, because when you start adding these little tiny touches of light to the tree, you want to get in, do the dab, and then just leave it alone. I guarantee if you do too much, you'll lose that lovely freshness. In fact, this brush is probably a little bit too tight. It's probably, a little holding its shape a little bit too much. I'd probably be better off with a small round brush, but it's what I've got in my hands. It's what I'm going to use. I'm going to put these little pops of light right to the very edge of the tree. Okay. Don't leave a little dark edge there. Light doesn't start a fraction of an inch in from the edge of the tree. It starts right at the edge of the tree. But that's it. If I play with this again, if I fiddle with these anymore, they're going to lose this lovely freshness. So my advice is to get in, drop them in, stand well back, have a good look, and then leave them alone. This needs a few more branches and a few more details to add. I'll probably do those again with a little bit of time lapse. Down here in the corner, I'm not going to put more bluebells. You can over-egg a pudding, as they say. And I'm simply going to be using some cad yellow, touch of sap green. Make some nice ferns. I've even got some of my original dark green colour there, just to tint it with. Again, we don't really want to be using colour which is completely at odds with everything else. I always try and use a colour that's, again, local. It has been used elsewhere in the painting. I'm thinking about the light coming through here maybe, so we're going to be hopefully catching a little bit of sunshine. And I'm just looking for some little bits of vegetation in here, maybe a nice fern. They have lovely sort of upright sort of patterns. There we go. And this just kind of tidies up this bottom corner in here. Now, not everything's going to be bright. I've got a little bit of bright yellow-green, and then use really nice dark green colour. You can throw a little bit of black in there. And what you do is you paint out some of it. In other words, you put in some ferns, but they're in shadow. So instead of being bright yellow-green, they're the opposite. They're very dark. And you use the brightness of that acrylic underpainting there to your advantage. So now it looks like there's lots more going on down in this corner than there really is. Most of it, say, just smoke and mirrors. Now I do have to move on to doing something with this pathway. We know which way the light's coming, so I need to think about adding some little pops of highlight on here. And some of the lights from the tree trunk I think would work quite well. And it was no mistake that I chose this nice sort of sandy brown colour for my shadows. Can you see it here in the reference picture? That's right. All I've got to do is put a few of these highlights across it and leave some of the sandy brown colour behind. There's no point in getting old if you're not going to get smarter when you're painting stuff. So I switched up my brush now. I've gone for a small round synthetic brush, and I'm going to be using various mixtures of ochre, grubby dirty white colour here. And this is just to sort of throw some pops of light across my path. Now remember, what we're doing is we're saving the dark and we're putting in some shadows and some lights in between, and literally just you're looking for the abstract shapes. Now what do I think about my colour? I think it needs to be a bit whiter than that, actually, a bit brighter. Kind of these colours here on the pathway are fairly bright. Let's say I'm thinking about this shadow, and it's the light elsewhere that I'm painting in. So I'm just going to touch this in. Quite blurry. So you don't want these to be too harsh. If you don't like using your fingertips, you can always use a cotton bud. And here's where, again, you've got to sort of look at your reference picture or your reference photograph and make some decisions. You think to yourself, well, in the photograph it looks one way, but when someone sees this as a painting, it's got to be sometimes a little easier to read. In other words, it's got to stand out, it's got to look totally believable very quickly so that the eye sees it and understands it straight away. If your eye has trouble interpreting what you're looking at, the chances are it'll disbelieve it very quickly, and you'll say, no, that doesn't look right to my eye. And that's precisely what happens sometimes when we're painting. We paint something, we try to make it look as faithful to the original as possible. And then you stand back and you think, no, I don't see it. My eye doesn't understand it, and you dismiss it as being wrong. But sometimes you have to work on this a little bit. Now, the other thing to remember, of course, is that, as I said, this pathway's got some wear and tear. So your lights and darks have to follow that line across. You know, this is supposed to be branches. So some of the little gaps in between here we can leave a little bigger and almost paint branches on the ground. Now, now before I do much more with this, I do need to stand back and have a look from the other side of the room. In case this needs attention, I think I might need to do something here to join the shadow of the tree to the base of the tree. So in other words, I've got something in here that's interrupting the visuals, and maybe I need to darken that up a tiny little bit more. Let me stand back. Yes, this doesn't quite join onto the tree properly. Visually, it doesn't quite work. The shadow at the base of the tree is going to be quite strong. And as it goes away from the base of the tree, the shadow becomes less intense. Now, do you see what happened there? Do you see what happened? I just linked that tree to this piece of pathway. Visually, it works suddenly. It's crazy little things like this that make art fantastic for me. And I do little things and I think, how can I make this work? I have to make these a little stronger too. So these look like the little shadows of the little bits of vegetation growing on the edge here. Further away, you're not going to see this darkness so much. It's going to become softer in the background, so you just don't see any of this real shadow. But I'm going to just put a little bit in here and there. About this too much. As long as it reads right over here, ooh, I got some green. As long as it reads right visually, then your eye will believe it. It's one of those crazy little things that we have to sometimes convince ourselves by painting to keep going, because we think somehow it doesn't seem to work or it's not going to work out right, and we quit, we stop, we give up too soon on trying to make something work. And I can tell you that quitting too soon is well, one thing I can tell you for sure is if you quit, you're definitely going to fail. You know, it's just that's the simplest, isn't it? If you don't carry on painting stuff, if you don't carry on experimenting, working, but you just quit, you just give up, then you're guaranteed to fail. But if you carry on trying, you stand every chance of getting it right. Once again, I got to take a stand back from this, see how this is looking, see if this is working. See if it needs more attention or whether I've done enough. I don't know. I think I might be there. So after a little bit more fine tuning, adding a few more little details here on the pathway and softening up a few edges here and there, I think this has worked out really well. But I hope you really kind of understand that sometimes just doing something like that, linking a tree with its shadow across the ground, just suddenly catapults your painting forwards, but only if you stick at it. Now, I've got a bit more to do on the other side here, a couple more trees to put in, maybe a little bit more vegetation. It's much the same as what I've already done, so I'm going to be using a little bit of time lapse just to get this completed, because I want this video ready for you to watch. So there you have it, bluebells in the woods. lovely painting, and I hope you get a chance to try and perfect those reflections and shadows. They'll make a big difference to your painting. I'll of course link the photograph down in the description below. But in the meantime, there's some more lovely paintings for you to do coming right up. Happy painting, people!